Welcome to the HealthChangers podcast presented by Cambia Health Solutions, where we share real stories of healthcare transformation from those experiencing it and those helping to make healthcare more personalized. I'm your host, Leslie. This episode is part of a special series of mini episodes highlighting our nation's caregivers in partnership with HealthChangers, a national movement recognizing and honoring caregivers. Until recently, there were 44 million caregivers in the United States. Now, in the midst of a global pandemic, we are all caregivers. Caregivers include medical teams, grocery workers, truck drivers, and others, working to find balance, trying to perform at work, while all at the same time not jeopardizing the care provided to their loved ones. Today, I'm delighted to be with two senior leaders at Cambia to talk about caregiving in our current environment, Jennifer Danielson and Peggy Maguire. And actually, they're going to set aside their professional roles and talk about caregiving in their families, and particularly Jennifer's. She has a multi-generational caregiver story that we are about to hear. So I will turn it over to Peggy and Jennifer.
Welcome, Jennifer. Thank you for being part of this.
Yeah, thanks, Peggy. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'd love for you just to start out by telling us a little bit about your job. I know you have a big and important job at Cambia, but could you please describe it for our listeners?
Yeah, you bet. One of my favorite parts of my job, Peggy, is how long you and I have been able to work together on so many different things over the years. So it's fun to talk with you today and talk a little bit about just our shared perspective on things. But for my job itself, I oversee public affairs and policy for Cambia. And that means that we work to educate and engage stakeholders externally, so elected officials, legislators, trade associations, other community leaders, regulators, on the topic of healthcare transformation and trying to work to make healthcare work better than it does today, cost less, and get more for it.
Thanks. I know that's you're quite humble in describing your role, because I know, especially in the last few months, it's been incredibly busy, and thinking about how to help our company navigate COVID on behalf of our customers. You've really been in there in the trenches, working hard with a variety of folks to make healthcare better for people and families. So, as I said at the beginning, it's a really big job, and you do it very well.
Thanks for that, Peggy. When COVID hit and, our team really sort of came to understand the level of, just work and engagement that was on the table for us, along with, governors and, clinical partners externally and regulators, both at the state and the federal level, just, across the board, in addition to just the reality of what people are dealing with on a day-by-day basis, we knew that this, our team sort of lives for times like this, although we could take a break from, from the intensity of things with COVID. But these are the times when it really matters. Data matters, information matters, and, good thinkers for creative solutions to tough problems, and the ability to sort of cut through the noise a little bit and get at some of those core questions. That's at the end of the day, that's truly the fun work and the meaningful work. And I think a big part of the reason why, a lot of the people on my team care so deeply about having the jobs that they do.
What other roles do you play outside of work?
I did an interview with a local business magazine a long time ago, and I got a little bit of attention from a quote that I included in there about just having a big old life in terms of the scope of the recognition of what so many of us do deal with in the totality of who we are as individuals, and the kind of lives that we lead with loved ones outside of the work, outside of the work setting too. So I'm a mom, I'm a stepmom, I'm a daughter. Until a few months ago, I still had a living grandmother as well. Try and be a good neighbor, although I feel like that's one of the areas that takes a back seat sometimes. Try and be a good friend some of the time. I'm a wife, and an aunt and a sibling, and like I said, which is true for just so many people, it's a big old life with lots of different facets to it.
Yeah, that is a big old life and a lot of expectations for you and on you. I know we've talked about your grandmother before. I'm sorry that she's passed. I know that you were very close to her. I'd love to have you tell us a little bit about her and what made her so special.
Thanks, Peggy. Yes. And like I said when we started, I've been friends for a long time, and what an important person my grandma June was in my life. And at my age, to still have had a living grandmother that my children came to know personally and directly as their great grandmother, and that's true for all of my nieces and nephews, and my siblings as well. It was such a blessing to just have her perspective, have her humor in all of our lives. My family, I come from a long line and hearty stock of women who lived to ripe old ages, and pioneers that crossed the states to settle in Utah. A grandfather that was English and emigrated to Canada and eventually to Utah. This grandmother of mine, Grandma June, was 99 when she passed away in February. She was just a few short months away from being 100. And just to give you a little bit of an aspect into her character, for decades, literally decades, she refused to get new hearing aids because she kept saying that she didn't need them, and no need to spend money on something like that, because she was sure she was gonna pass away before she got the benefit of them. But yeah. I lived with her while I was in college and going through law school as well. And politics was her spectator sport. She read the newspaper religiously. She really mourned the death of print media and the kind of news that she used to be able to get from paper subscriptions. Teaching her how to read, publications from around the world on the Kindle or a computer just was not going to work for her. She demised she really lamented the demise of the card catalog system at the library. But for her and for that interest in politics that, my dad and my aunt and others have had, that definitely was part of a growing up experience for me, and really sort of led to that understanding of that deep intersection between politics and policy and healthcare as well.
That's so interesting. It's especially as you were living with her, as you were forming your own legal career and absorbing all of that. Very interesting, and explains a lot about why you're doing what you're doing now. I love that.
Thank you. One time she was a Democrat through and through. And one time I brought home a Bush bumper sticker and just folded down the corners of the paper backing on the back of the sticker and stuck it to her fridge. And she didn't talk to me for about 48 hours because she thought that I had, attached the entire thing to her fridge.
Oh, that is so funny. That's great. Well, she sounds like a remarkable woman, and I'm glad that you had her in your life for as long as you did.
Yes, thank you.
Now, speaking of your big old life, you talked about a lot of the roles that you play, and I have to ask you, do you identify yourself as a caregiver?
When you and I started talking about having this conversation, I really had to stop and think about that because I hadn't really categorized myself as a caregiver before, but of course I am, just like everyone is in so many different respects. And that experience with my grandmother, as she really started to decline in that last year of her life, she experienced so many different healthcare issues. She had a fall and broke her hip. She had pneumonia. She had, heart failure, and that's ultimately what she ended up passing away from. But there were just so many questions along the way about good doctors, good resources, ways to meet her desire to remain at home as long as she could, and just so much complexity that my parents, were trying to deal with, that it became, it became a group of us really working to, sort of find those solutions and meet the needs and get her to the appointments and figure out all of the other in-between stuff too. And that wasn't just us alone, siblings and other family members played a big part as well. But, I think that caregiving extends beyond just people who are in sort of those healthcare moments in their lives and that day-to-day help for people like my own parents who are in their mid-70s and are pretty homebound due to COVID these days, and what the work that we want to do because we love them so much to help them feel not so lonely and make sure that they're, getting the groceries that they need and taking care of, whatever stuff at the house or, banking related issues or whatever the case might be. So, and then of course that stems to things related to kids as well, for how drastically their lives have changed and how much minding online school actually takes to execute on processes. So yes, Peggy, I mean, I hadn't thought of myself as a caregiver before, but I think that when we actually just step back and take a look at this stuff that we just do in our lives on a day-to-day basis, it's really pretty astounding how much caregiving I think that we all ultimately do give on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah. I mean, as I heard you tell your story, I think I jotted down on my notepad, caring across multiple generations. You're not caring for one person, you're caring for multiple people across multiple generations, including, your children, your spouse, your parents, and your grandmother. That's pretty remarkable, all while holding down this big job. So let me ask you specifically about the last few months, and how has the COVID-19 pandemic impacted you and your caregiver responsibilities, any one of those caregiver responsibilities?
Yeah. It's both simplified things just in terms of some of the structure that has to become necessary in how, you go about doing things. But it's also complicated other things just in terms of the new things that I've got to learn. Like I said, that process of learning online school and just keeping a 13-year-old young man on track for things like that. It's both simplified some things and complicated others, but it's definitely felt And I know from talking, and Peggy, I'm sure that you have the same experience. I know by talking to so many other people that there are just so many people who are feeling the the added weight of that burden and feeling just a little bit more isolated in terms of how we go about dealing with all of this stuff too.
And there's a fair amount of anxiety, I would say, about interacting with others, right? In terms of as the cases continue to spread and surge, how do you think about bringing a meal to your parents, or, staying socially distant, wearing a mask, all of those things, and balancing kind of the things we need to do to reduce the spread of the virus against things that we need to do to help people feel less isolated and to, help with mental health issues, frankly, including our own, to have that sense of connection with other people. It's really, it can be a very challenging time for people who are giving care and people who are receiving care.
Yep, I think that's true. I think I think that when you sort of have a collective understanding of what the protection measures are, it makes it easier to deal with it. But then you're just dealing with that human element of just the weariness of it all as well. So yeah, it's a lot for everyone to deal with.
Yeah. And we've been working from home for several months now. And I think, when we first started working from home in, I think, early March, I don't think any of us anticipated we'd still be working from home as we approach the holidays. How has working from home changed your life?
Prior to COVID, I really did travel quite extensively. And I think, I think this is just my own natural sort of viewpoint with things, that there are generally, pros and cons to anything based on the lens that you put on it. So a pro for me for COVID is that prior to COVID, I really traveled quite a bit for work. And of course, that is completely shut down. And other than actually seeing my colleagues and friends and the benefits that you get from just working with people on a face-to-face basis, it's actually given me quite a bit more time at home than I've really ever had in the entirety of my working career. I think that I'm actually working more hours than I did before, but I'm spending so much less time traveling that it's easier to find, just those snippets of time, to just fit family stuff in between the gaps here and there. And for me personally, I've got 2 kids at home with me. I've got 3 older stepkids that don't live with us and are, at more advanced stages of their own lives. But my 2 kiddos that live with us are 13 and 17. So for my daughter, the 17-year-old, this is her senior year of high school. And, the way last year ended and this one is turning out to be, it's been a pretty emotional, roller coaster on the home front. So I've been very grateful to have, that silver lining blessing for us just to be able to, be home every single night to give the poor girl a hug,
Yeah, that is great. When you think about, the challenges you've faced and the bright spots you've experienced, do you have any advice for other people who might be listening and are experiencing similar situations? Like you, they may not identify themselves as caregivers, but they're definitely providing and receiving care. What advice do you have for people that are navigating this pandemic, working and trying to maintain their relationships with loved ones?
Yeah. Yeah. I, I think a few things come to mind. And the first probably goes back to what you and I were talking about before, in just taking that moment to pause and recognize what you are doing, and give yourself that moment to feel that, recognition for yourself, even if you don't get it from other people, but give yourself that recognition for playing that caregiver role, and, take that mental moment just to reconnect to that underlying reason for the why. I mean, you know, ultimately we do these things because we love these people. And, there probably is, in some of those really tough days, an element of duty that just keeps us going along with it. But ultimately we're doing these things because we love people. I spoke at my grandmother's funeral in February, and a quote that I used from a religious leader of our faith said something powerful, and it related to this idea of, in order to take the sting out of death, the pain out of death, you have to take the love out of life. Death hurts because we love people, and we do these tremendously, burdensome and oftentimes tough things because we love people. And that says a whole heck of a lot, I think, about us, and the why behind it, that I think more often than not we need to all just pause and acknowledge and be grateful for.
Yeah. Oh, that fills me with hope. I know we're not looking at each other right now, but I'm about to cry because that was so beautifully stated. And it is all about love and caring, and that's what the world needs right now.
It's I think that when we take off those masks of, not to take our discussion here to a different place, but we as a country, we as a global community have real issues that we've got to deal with. But I'm a big believer that there's more good than there is bad, and that when you actually, strip away labels and you strip away the contention that sits behind it, there is more often than not a desire to find that support for each other, and that humanity at the end of the day.
Thank you. Very well said. And thank you for your time today. Appreciate learning more about your journey as a caregiver, and appreciate your advice about remembering our why and our sense of purpose.
Yeah, you bet. And thank you, Peggy. It's nice to do just what I said in terms of the advice. Just have a minute to pause and think about that too.
All right. Well, thank you, and take care.
Thanks, Peggy.
Before we wrap up this special episode on caregiving in a COVID-19 world, we asked Alex Strain, the co-founder of HealthChangers, a national movement to recognize and honor caregivers, to share a little reflection on what she heard. I invite you to listen.
Okay, so I just have to say, Peggy, you nailed it when you shared how this made you feel just then at the end. I am a big old +1 on that. Jennifer, you really do have a big old life. And what a gift that was for your grandma, June. I feel like I know her. I wish I did know her. What a gift it is for all of us. And I think the things that really stood out for me, one, how Jennifer was a caregiver to all of us in sharing all those stories that she just did, and letting us into her circle, and with such a warm and contagious laugh, right? Like, it was such a joy listening to you both. And I think, Jennifer, really you embody what we call look, love, lift. I think for yourself, but then also in the advice you gave at the end. And look, love, lift is this term we use for look for caregivers because they're everywhere and they don't look like what we expect. You got to take a minute to love on them and recognize the love that they're giving. And then you got to give them a lift. And from a look perspective, I mean, it was so beautiful when you shared that you yourself didn't think of yourself as a caregiver. when Peggy asked you to do this. And that's so true. There are caregivers everywhere. 1 in 4 caregivers are millennials. 1 in 5 are Gen Z. 45% are men. We know that 61% of the population right now says yes when asked, are you caring for or worrying over the health of a loved one, neighbor, or a family member or friend? And you nailed it. You described every single aspect, every single one of those folks when you were walking through your stories. And also you recognize that it's not a one-to-one, that there are often, in a situation with your grandmom, how many of you pulled together to be supporting her, and how with COVID and the social distancing and all the appropriate requirements we're all taking to keep, your parents safe, my parents safe, that we're all stepping in as caregivers in different ways. And from a love perspective, you actually used the term, I took notes on everything you said, that you just really had not thought of yourself as a caregiver. When you stood back and you took a look at all the things that we're doing in our lives, it's pretty astounding how much caregiving that people are doing on a day-to-day basis. And that's love, right? That's that love component. And then the lift. I love this notion. You nailed this as well. Lifts are examples of, doing groceries, helping someone with their banking, taking care of the house, whatever it can be that we can be doing to love on the people that are caregivers, to love on the folks that they're caring on. Look, love, lift. And then you also talked so beautifully about this notion of, you described so perfectly, when you give a lift, you get a lift. That's what we always say. So look, love, lift. And when you give a lift, you get a lift. And the fact that you mentioned how your team gets fired up, really, how in this time that is so hard, that they're they're doubling down on doing more. And of course, we have such empathy, gratitude to your team for doing that. But I love that you also nailed, and I know this is true for Cambia employees across the board, Peggy, you so embody this, that in supporting others, it makes them feel better. And in giving those lifts to everybody that you guys are caring for, your coworkers, your loved ones, your members for Cambia, you yourselves are getting lifts out of that. And then I thank you for talking about the benefit of COVID, because we know that there is so much about it that's really hard. And there's also a lot of it that's beautiful, which you talked about it. But some of the hard stuff is really this impact. I've got a 14-year-old and a 15-year-old. And this is hard. This is hard for all generations. This is unprecedentedly challenging. And the impact on behavioral health is real. And we know that 1 in 3 unpaid caregivers contemplated suicide in the month of June. This is a study that we did that got published by the CDC. And we know that age is not protective. In fact, the younger you are, Gen Z and younger, that folks are really, really the loneliness, the isolation, the lack of experience in having resiliency. And let's not believe that if you get older, it's that much better. A full 42% of boomers are also feeling anxiety and depression. So very important. Thank you for calling that component out so we can all be figuring out what to do. And which gets me to just the opportunity for all of us. And I think in your role in the from a policy perspective, from a public affairs perspective, I'm so glad that you're knitting all this together. And it's fun to think of how much you inherited from Grandma June, as she's going to be now in my head, that we have to break out of these silos. When you think about the fluidity of the caregiver role, so many caregivers right now are needing to quit their jobs or reduce their hours because they can't possibly figure it all out. And I think from what I've seen of what you guys are doing, you're trying to address that, again, for across all these silos. So not just for your employees, but also for your members, and also looking at what employers can be doing, and also looking at what health systems can be doing, and also recognizing what can local communities be doing, and what can the state be doing, and what can the federal government be doing. So we can really meet these caregivers where they are across these different spectrums as they go through these stages, so we can help them stay employed, help them stay healthy, help support them in this extraordinary work that they're doing. So Jennifer, I just want to say you not only have quite possibly one of the coolest grandmothers ever, sending big love up to you, June. I hope you're hearing this wherever you are in the sky. I think you really do have a big old life. And I'm so grateful to you and to Peggy and to all of Cambia that you guys are using all that power for good. Thank you for letting me be a part of this. It was extraordinary to listen to. I wish I could make your laugh my ringtone.
That wraps up this episode of Health Changers. You can find more information on all of our episodes at cambiahealth.com. You can also follow us on Twitter at Cambia, Cambia. For more information on Archangels, check out their website at archangels.me or follow them on Twitter at ArchangelsMe. You can now find HealthChangers on all of your favorite platforms. Just search for HealthChangers on platforms like Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and iHeartRadio. Also, subscribe and leave a review. Thank you for listening.